taking place and to achieve a just peace between the Palestinians and Israel on the basis of Security Council resolutions and General Assembly resolutions. Let us resolve this together, and perhaps our U.S. colleagues will at some point have their conscience awakened. Thank you.
Representative of the Russian Federation for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Thank you, Madam President. سيد الرئيس.
Madam President, allow me at the outset to express my appreciation to all the members of the Security Council for constructively participating in the negotiations. Allow me also to thank all states that voted for and not against the draft resolution. I also thank those who abstained, because this draft resolution calls mainly for a ceasefire in Gaza. The draft resolution would have sent a strong message to Palestinians, saying that the world is not standing idly by their suffering. However, and unfortunately, the Security Council failed once again to rise to the calls and aspirations of peoples of the world. This failure does not absolve the Security Council of shouldering its responsibilities. This failure does not absolve the international community of its obligations vis-à-vis the unarmed Palestinian people. This failure does not absolve the occupation power of its obligation to implement the precautionary measures ordered by the International Court of Justice. It is high time for the aggression to end. It is high time for humanitarian assistance to be delivered across Gaza. It is clear that resolutions 2712 and 2720 did not achieve their objectives. It is clear that assistance did not meet the basic needs of the Palestinian people. We have to acknowledge that only a ceasefire can achieve the desired objective. Madam President, the current situation requires everyone, as stressed by the Algerian President, His Excellency Abdelmajid Tebboune, to work on putting the purposes and principles of the United Nations first, to provide the necessary protection to the Palestinian people, and to put an end to their historic injustice. Madam President, the people of our region have always looked up to the Security Council as the source of international legitimacy. However, and unfortunately, the Security Council has failed them once again. Our message to you today is that the international community should respond to the calls for ending the killing of Palestinians by calling for an immediate ceasefire. All those impeding such calls should review their policies and their calculations, because wrong decisions today will have a cost on our region and our world tomorrow. And this cost will be violence and instability. So ask yourselves, examine your conscience. What will your decisions today cause? How will history judge you? Madam President, before I conclude, I would like to tell everyone that we will bury our martyrs this evening in Rafah, in Gaza, in all Palestine, and that Algeria will return tomorrow on behalf of the Arab world, on behalf of Muslim countries, and on behalf of all the free people in the world. Powered by the souls of thousands of innocent people killed by the Israeli occupation, with no accountability whatsoever. Algeria will return to knock on the doors of the Security Council once again to call for putting an end to the bloodshed in Palestine. We will not stop until this council shoulders its responsibilities in full and imposes an immediate ceasefire. We will never tire, and we will never stop. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Algeria for his statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Guyana. Colleagues, Guyana is disappointed that this council has once again been unable to deliver a ceasefire for the people of Gaza. A ceasefire is the difference between life and death for the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians and others trapped in the war zone that Gaza has become. The delegation of Algeria has approached the tabling of this resolution with great patience transparency, and inclusivity. They have listened to all sides, acquiescing to requests for additional time to be given to other efforts underway. It has been almost 3 weeks since the draft was circulated, and we still find ourselves at square one. In that time, almost 2,000 more Palestinians were killed in Gaza, another 2,000 more injured. In those 3 weeks, every aspect of life in Gaza has gotten worse. Internal displacement has increased, with a serious crisis underway in Rafah. Food insecurity continued to worsen, with the latest Integrated Food Security and Nutrition Phase Classification, IPC, report stating that Gaza now has the highest share of persons facing devastating levels of acute food insecurity that the IPC has ever classified for any given area or country. The humanitarian situation has been described as increasingly severe. Humanitarian access is extremely limited, and people's desperation has led them to looting aid trucks to secure a morsel of food. The population is in dire straits. The most vulnerable among them, including children, the elderly, and people with underlying conditions, are especially vulnerable to malnutrition. And all of this is happening in freezing temperatures. In that time, we have also seen a further hardening of positions for the worse. For example, we have heard the determination of the Israeli government to proceed with a ground operation in Rafah, despite the strong urgings to the contrary by many of its friends and partners and others in the international community. We know what a ground operation in Rafah would mean for the people who were driven there by the Israeli Defense Force. The ICJ orders of 26th of January are being completely ignored, as though there is no obligation to adhere to them. UN personnel are continuing to operate in Gaza under these extremely dangerous circumstances, with unprecedented numbers of them killed since 7th of October. Deconfliction mechanisms are not being respected, so everyone is at risk and nowhere is safe. Dear colleagues, what else needs to happen to act for the people in Gaza? How many more lives must be lost? How many more must be maimed? How many more? We need a ceasefire now. Resolutions 2712 and 2720 cannot be fully implemented if there is no ceasefire. The longer we take to agree on the need for a ceasefire, the longer this Council will be seen as being complicit in what is taking place in Gaza. To be clear, Guyana also calls for the release of all hostages taken on October 7th and Palestinians unlawfully detained in Israeli prisons without trial. Though progress has been stalled for decades, the two-state solution still remains the best option for a permanent and lasting resolution of the Palestinian question. The current situation in Gaza puts the two-state solution at great risk, especially given the rhetoric from some Israeli government officials. Guyana calls on this Council to act now for Gaza and for the future of both Palestine and Israel. A peaceful and stable Israel depends on a peaceful and stable Palestine. The two are not mutually exclusive. And a peaceful Palestine and Israel is crucial for lasting peace and stability of the Middle East region. I thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine.
Madam President, we thank you and your friendly country, Guyana, for your leadership of the Security Council. We thank Algeria for all its efforts and its statement that my brother Ammar delivered a few minutes ago in bringing forth the draft resolution on behalf of the Arab group that has just been voted regarding the grave situation that continues to be faced by the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip as Israel, the occupying power, carries on with its genocidal war. We also thank the 13 members of the Security Council who voted in favor of the draft, and we thank you also for your intense engagement with the Arab group led by our brother, the Ambassador of Algeria, during the course of the last 3 weeks, negotiating in good faith, of trying to save the Palestinian people's lives in the Gaza Strip and not to allow the looming catastrophe flying over our heads in having a further catastrophe on the Gaza Strip. We sincerely thank you for that effort, for your principled position, and for your determination that a ceasefire has to be demanded, implemented now to save lives, to save the Gaza Strip, to save the 1.5 million Palestinians in the Rafah district. This draft resolution was brought to the Council precisely because Israel persists with the onslaught, persists with every single grave breach it has been committing, despite the near unanimous calls by the international community for a ceasefire, and despite the ICJ provisional measures ordered to Israel to cease all acts of genocide and incitement to genocide, and to ensure humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people, who every day are facing death and destruction and the torment of starvation and repeated forced displacement. It has been nearly 3 weeks since I last addressed the Council following the Court's order appealing for action to be taken to ensure the implementation of the provisional measures, to ensure a ceasefire that would protect the Palestinian people and avert the further ravaging of their lives by the Israeli onslaught. But our appeals have regrettably been to no avail. Between our last Council session on the 31st of January and today, the casualty toll has risen from 26,000 Palestinians killed by the Israeli occupying forces to now almost 30,000 people killed and more than 69,000 people injured. This means that in just the past 20 days alone, Israel has killed nearly 4,000 more Palestinian children, women, and men in just 20 days. This is a deplorable consequence of inaction. It means more than 200 Palestinians killed every day. It means that by the time this Security Council session ends, more than 25 Palestinians will have been killed. It means more babies will be murdered, wounded, amputated, and orphaned. More children will die of hunger and hypothermia and disease. It means the continued threat of the further forced displacement of families, the looming danger of a mass expulsion or worse, slaughter of the nearly 1.5 million people in Rafah who have nowhere to flee, no protection whatsoever. It means the continued deprivation of the entire population of Gaza, left without food, water, medicine, and shelter, essential to alleviate suffering and ensure survival. It means that the human lives that could have been spared and saved are instead being forsaken to Israel's genocidal war machine, deliberately, knowingly, by those who oppose a ceasefire. We all know this. We know the staggering figures. We have heard the warning from the Secretary General, the heads of all UN agencies on the ground, dozens of independent special rapporteurs and humanitarian and human rights agencies the world over. We have seen it with our own eyes in pictures and videos that have seared and stained our collective conscience and broken our hearts and our humanity. In the face of Israel's brazen violation of the ICJ order, the court sent another warning, issued another decision on 16 February, reminding Israel that it is bound to fully comply with its obligations under the Genocide Convention and all the provisional measures ordered by the court on 26 January. The court also had to remind Israel that its obligations are immediate and should be effective. The call for ceasefire should have been agreed to long time ago. What threshold needs to be crossed for this Council to finally demand a ceasefire? What could be more serious than the crime than genocide? History, as my brother Ammar said, is going to judge the Council harshly. It is already doing so, impairing its credibility and authority in the eyes of people all over the world, perhaps irreparably. But we will not be complacent in this inaction. We have a duty to our people to seek every possible pathway to bring an end to the slaughter, an end to the trauma and terror, an end to the threats to expel them from their land. We will not be silent, and we will act with every legitimate means to uphold our sacred obligations to defend and protect our people and to pursue justice for them. That is why we have come back to the Security Council over and over again, imploring it to act to protect our people. That is why we will not relent in seeking accountability, calling on the Council, the General Assembly, and all states to act in line with the Charter and all obligations under international law without selectivity, without exception. We will not stop demanding accountability for the war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide that Israel is perpetrating against the Palestinian people. But accountability must move beyond words in these chambers. It must mean real consequences for the occupying power for its criminal behavior. To this end, I just have returned around midnight last night from The Hague, where the State of Palestine stood before the ICJ, appealing to the Court for Justice after more than 75 years of Nakba, 56 years of belligerent occupation, 17 years of blockade, and nearly 140 days of vindictive, punitive siege and massacres perpetrated by Israel in Gaza, which is a genocide. What crimes has Israel not committed yet? We have gone to the court along with an unprecedented number of countries to confront the Israeli impunity that has made life a living hell for the Palestinian people, appealing for an immediate and complete end to this illegal colonial occupation and apartheid regime, the root cause of all the ills our people are suffering, including this genocidal war. The court has undertaken its solemn duties, acting swiftly both in response to the case brought by South Africa against Israel under the Genocide Convention and in response to the General Assembly's request for advisory opinion, which we hope will be a true turning point in the quest for accountability and for justice for the Palestinian people. When will the Security Council finally undertake its solemn duties? When will the Council act to demand the ceasefire that has been demanded by the rest of the international community majority for months now? The veto of this draft resolution is not only regrettable after weeks of consultations with every single Council member, and after endless patience by the State of Palestine, the Arab states, and nearly the entire international community that for months have demanded a ceasefire. It is absolutely reckless and dangerous against shielding Israel even as it commits the most shocking crimes while exposing millions of innocent Palestinian civilians to its wrath and more untold horrors. It is not Israel that should be protected by the veto. It is Palestinian children, women, and men who must be protected by this Council acting now. Only with a ceasefire can we give a chance for life, for Resolution 2712 and 2720 to be implemented, as the President of the Security Council has indicated correctly. Ceasefire would allow these two resolutions to be implemented for humanitarian assistance to reach the millions of desperate people in need, for UNRWA and other UN agencies to deliver life-saving aid, and a chance for our collective efforts to chart a path for justice and peace. And as long as the Council fails to demand a ceasefire, it will be considered not only derelict in its duties, but an enabler of the most horrific crimes we are witnessing in these days in Gaza. The message given today to Israel with this veto is that it can continue to get away with murder. Israel cannot and should not and will not get away with it. We will not allow it. This veto does not absolve Israel of its obligations, nor of those who shield it. Not here in the Security Council, not in the ICJ, and not anywhere. Even if the Security Council continues to shirk its responsibilities, to be obstructed by the veto of a permanent member over and over, the other organs of the international system are upholding their responsibilities. And one day or another, Palestinian children will not be viewed as a demography threat, but as children with a right to life and to fulfill their hopes and dreams. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Madam President. Since October 7th, this Council has voted upon numerous resolutions constructed around the same flawed theme, the concept of a ceasefire. This word is constantly mentioned in the Security Council, in the General Assembly, and by UN officials and agencies, as if it is a silver bullet, a magical solution to all of the region's problems. For the past 137 days, the only solution discussed on the international stage is this absurd notion of a ceasefire. Will a ceasefire bring home the hostages? Will a ceasefire eliminate Hamas? Will a ceasefire disarm Hezbollah, the Houthis, and all the other Iranian terrorist proxies in our region? Will a ceasefire end the genocidal ambitions of Palestinian terror groups aiming for Israel's annihilation? We're still waiting for President Abbas to condemn the October 7th massacre. What exactly will this silver bullet ceasefire achieve? A ceasefire achieves one thing and one thing only: the survival of Hamas. Exactly the opposite of how it's portrayed. A ceasefire is a death sentence for many more Israelis and Gazans. Supporting a ceasefire means supporting the survival of jihadist terrorists that will continue butchering Israelis and endlessly spilling the blood of innocents. There is a reason, dear colleagues, that the ICJ unanimously and rightly rejected South Africa's attempt to undermine Israel's right to defend itself by calling for a ceasefire. The very idea that Israel would be denied this fundamental right while Hamas would be free to continue its terror and hold hostages is morally unthinkable, because as you know, Hamas is not going to even read your resolutions. So why are some on this council so determined to impose harmful measures that the ICJ refused to take? You all know the answers. Colleagues, a ceasefire is the epitome of a kick the can down the road policy. A ceasefire today means immunity for baby killers and rapists. It's an easy way to make this problem an issue for another day. With a ceasefire in place, Hamas will regroup, rearm, and their next attempted genocide against Israelis will only be a question of when, not if. Hamas has sworn publicly to commit the atrocities of October 7th again and again and again until Israel is annihilated. So why is the Council, charged with security, is so fixated on aiding these monsters to stay in power? Just yesterday, Israel exposed footage proving that Shiri Bibas and her two children, 4-year-old Ariel and 1-year-old Kfir, were taken to Gaza alive. So tell me, distinguished council members, a 4-year-old and a baby were taken hostage by Hamas, among others, and most of you choose to support a ceasefire? Why do you want to leave them in Gaza? Do you not see how immoral that is? And what kind of precedent this would set for terrorists around the globe? Did you think about baby Kfir when you voted on this resolution? A resolution that would ensure that Kfir, along with 133 other hostages, remain in dark terror tunnels? Did you think about Noa Argamani? Noa's look of sheer horror as she violently separated from her boyfriend Avinoam Or and taken to Gaza on the back of a motorbike has become a symbol of the hostages' plight. In the heart-wrenching video, you can hear Noa screaming and pleading with the terrorists not to abduct her. Noa's mother, Liora, born Chong Hong Lee, a Chinese-Israeli citizen originally from Wuhan, is terminally ill with stage 4 brain cancer. All she asks is that she can hug Noa, her only daughter, one last time before she succumbs to her illness. To my Chinese colleague, I ask you, in the name of Liora Chong Hong Lee, rather than pushing for a harmful ceasefire which will keep Noa in Gaza, I urge you, pressure Hamas to release Noa so that her mother can see Noah one last time before her death. Colleagues, jihadists around the globe see that the body mandated to uphold international security is willing to allow murderous Hamas rapists to continue their reign of terror. Your calls for a ceasefire empower Hamas, giving them hope to stay in power. This does not ensure security, it prevents it. You truly want a ceasefire? Well, Israel also wants a ceasefire. Your children are not the ones that are falling in battle against bloodthirsty terrorists. They are ours. If Hamas survives, it will be our children that Hamas will murder in cold blood again. Israel seeks a ceasefire, but there is only one formula that we are willing to accept. All of our hostages must be released, and Hamas must turn themselves in. Colleagues, the Algerian resolution not only empowers jihadists by calling for a ceasefire, it also fails, again, to condemn Hamas for their heinous crimes. Not condemning Hamas's atrocities has now become a tradition here. It's tragic. Hamas Nazis invaded Israel, deliberately murdering families, raping women and girls, and destroying everything they could get their hands on. They are brutal terrorists who took pride in their barbarism. Yet, not once, not even once, since October 7th, has this Council or any UN body condemned Hamas and their violence. One day, we mentioned history here, when historians studied the reasons why the UN lost its standing and influence, the inability of this organization to condemn terrorists that slaughter children will be one of the driving factors. Mark my words. But the impact of this Council's decisions spread much further than this room. If this Council is incapable of condemning Hamas, UN officials feel like they have further legitimacy to whitewash Hamas. Mere days ago, Under-Secretary General Griffith stated that Hamas is not a terrorist group, but a political movement. Is the intentional, brutal murder of hundreds of civilians not terror? Is the systematic rape of women not terror? Is beheading and burning children alive not terror? We all know Hamas is a terrorist organization, yet by staying silent in the face of Hamas's crimes and not condemning them, you allow such lies to perpetuate. Your politicized decision of silence promotes the falsehoods that Hamas can be reasoned with, that they are not the bloodthirsty terrorists that they are. And this is the stance that the UN adopts and promotes. Condemn Hamas as a council, condemn their atrocities, rid this institution of its shame. Do it for the sake of those butchered, for the sake of the hostages, for the sake of morality and truth. It's in your hands. Colleagues, some of you have approached me and asked me why Israel is so critical of the UN and its agencies. The recent event over the past weeks have hopefully made it clearer to you. 1 week ago, Special Rapporteur Albanese libelously stated that the victims of October 7th were not murdered for their identity, but in response to Israel's so-called oppression. This is victim blaming and a clear justification of terror. But for some UN employees, even poisonous words are not enough. Dozens of UNRWA employees took active roles in the October 7th massacre, while many more praised the savage attack. Faisal Ali Musallem El-Naami, an UNRWA social worker, stuffed the body of Jonathan Samirano into a truck to be taken to Gaza. A Hamas data center was located directly underneath UNRWA headquarters in Gaza, connected to UNRWA's power supply, and terror tunnels have been found running underneath various UNRWA facilities, schools, everything. Out of UNRWA's 1,300 employees in Gaza, 12%, I repeat, 12% are members of Hamas, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and at least 236 of them are active terrorists in these organizations' armed wings. UNRWA has been proven to be an instrumental part of Hamas's terror machine, which makes UNRWA itself a terrorist organization. Yet, rather than take responsibility for the weaponization of this murderous UN agency, Commissioner General Lazzarini has chosen to say that he had no knowledge of Hamas's hold on his own agency. This is blatantly false. Israel exposed terror tunnels under UNRWA schools and supplied evidence of Hamas's exploitation of UNRWA. You can see it in my Twitter account. I personally sent letters to the Commissioner General and the Secretary General. We implored them for years to carry out a comprehensive search of all UNRWA facilities in Gaza. Yet not only did they refuse, they chose to bury their heads in the sand and ignore the reality. This is why every report, every statement or number provided by the UN cannot be trusted. In Gaza, dear colleagues, Hamas is the UN and the UN is Hamas. Distinguished Council members, this ostrich tactic, burying one's head in the sand, is the modus operandi among UN leadership. Yet, no matter how deep one's head is buried, it will not change the reality on the ground. A terrorist is a terrorist. A terror organization is a terror organization. And a law-abiding liberal democracy will remain as such. Even if here at the UN, for political reasons, light becomes darkness and day becomes night. This is also the case with the escalating situation on Israel's northern border with Lebanon. For years, and you heard it here, for years Israel has called for this council to impose the implementation of Security Council Resolution 1701. Yet, for years, the UN has opted for the ostrich tactic. Tragically, this is no longer a situation that can be ignored. The clock is ticking. It is not a matter of years, but weeks before Israel will be forced to implement Resolution 1701 ourselves. Just yesterday, a Hezbollah drone was downed while flying over the Sea of Galilee, deep, deep inside Israel. Over 2,000 Hezbollah missiles and rockets have rained down on the cities of Israel's north. 2,000. And nearly 100,000 residents of northern Israel have been displaced due to the threat posed by Hezbollah, with, of course, Iran's backing. A ceasefire in Gaza is not only destructive for Israel and the Palestinians, it also ensures that a blind eye is turned to what is unfolding in the rest of the region. Be it the Houthis' relentless attacks on maritime trade, pro-Iran militias targeting even American service members, or Hezbollah's constant bombardment of Israel's north. The clock is ticking, and sadly, we will be forced to take decisive action. Terror will never be tolerated. Madam President, this Council must put politics aside for the sake of its mandate. A ceasefire that allows Hamas to remain in power means ensured death and destruction. Ignoring Hamas's atrocities and not condemning them means empowering terrorists worldwide. And focusing only on Gaza while looking away from the terror aggression across the region will lead to a future that none of us seek. The Security Council must fulfill its mandate. It must side with Israel against the forces of evil, and it must face reality. Reality is not found when one's head is buried in the sand. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Israel for his statement. I shall now give the floor to the representative of Qatar.
شكرا لكم السيد الرئيس.
I would like to thank you, Madam President, and I'd like to thank your friendly country on your presidency of the Security Council. It is a pleasure for me to deliver a statement on the behalf of the Arab countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council. My country, the state of Qatar, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, the Sultanate of Oman, and the Kingdom of Bahrain align themselves with the statement to be delivered by the Arab group. Madam President, today's meeting is being held under extremely difficult circumstances. The situation in the Gaza Strip has increasingly deteriorated, and we are facing the worst humanitarian disaster the world has seen. According to UN reports today, there is no safe place in the Gaza Strip. Almost all residents of the Gaza Strip, whose number is more than 2 million, these 2 million people are now refugees and people faced with the risk of starvation. At a time when the aggression by the Israeli occupying power against our Palestinian brethren has been ongoing for 5 months, the GCC has cautioned against the increased frequency of military attacks against our Palestinian brothers. We caution against the increased number of victims, the majority of whom are women and children who have been killed, wounded, and people under rubble. We call on the United Nations to assume responsibility. The UN officials have said that never seen a situation such as that taking place today. The UN Secretary General invoked Article 99 of the Charter, warned about the dangers of the collapse of the humanitarian system and of public order in Gaza. He also called for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. There's a need to fully implement the resolutions 2720 and 2712 of the Security Council dating 2022. Madam President, the Arab states of the Gulf Cooperation Council condemn in the firmest terms the Israeli threat regarding the launch of a military operation against the city of Rafah. In the city of Gaza, we caution against the fact that these threats portend an increase in violence levels and destabilization. These threats represent a danger to regional stability. We firmly condemn the attempts at forced displacement of civilians, and we firmly reject any military engagement in the city of Rafah. We caution against a new humanitarian disaster in that area. This is the last refuge for hundreds of thousands of displaced persons in the Gaza Strip. In the same vein, we profoundly regret the suspension by some donors of their financing for UNRWA, specifically in the light of the dangerous humanitarian situation which we are all bearing witness to. 5 million Palestinian people depend on the agency, especially in the Gaza Strip. We align ourselves in this regard with what was said by the SG in his call for countries who have halted their support to UNRWA to reconsider and to reinstate their financing for the agency to end the humanitarian disaster in Gaza to prevent it from worsening. Our countries reiterate their steadfast position in support of the just Palestinian cause and the legitimate rights of the fraternal people to establish an independent state on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as the capital. Madam President, Arab states of the GCC extend their appreciation for the ongoing negotiations around a framework agreement for a new humanitarian truce in Gaza. My country, the state of Qatar, has been facilitating these efforts alongside the Arab Republic of Egypt and the U.S. to free hostages and detainees, to guarantee greater deliveries of humanitarian assistance and to rescue efforts in Gaza to protect civilians. The Arab states of the GCC have profound regrets regarding the failure of the Council to adopt a draft resolution submitted by Algeria. This was supported by the Arab group and the overwhelming majority of members of the Council. This draft is humanitarian by its content and aligns with IHL. We wish to emphasize in this regard that our country will continue efforts alongside partners at all levels to guarantee the achievement of an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. Let us end the bloodletting of the Palestinian people, and let us deliver adequate volumes of humanitarian assistance and relief to Gaza, and let us protect civilians. Thank you very much for your attention.
Representative of Qatar for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Tunisia.
شكرا السيدة الرئيسة.
Thank you, Madam President. It is my honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Arab group. Allow me at the outset to congratulate you and your country, Guyana, for presiding over the Security Council this month. We thank you for holding this session. We would like to thank Algeria, the Arab member in the Security Council, for taking the initiative to table the draft resolution and make every effort during the negotiations to preserve the unity of the Security Council and reach consensus on a call for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. This is the most urgent measure during these catastrophic circumstances in the Gaza Strip and the horrible humanitarian suffering of the Palestinian people. This is caused by the occupation forces' continued aggression, war crimes, genocide against the Palestinian people, which continue unabated. The occupation forces also continue to impose a collective punishment and prevent humanitarian, medical, food, and fuel assistance to be delivered to Gaza. Madam President, the Arab Group would like to thank the Council members that positively contributed and constructively participated in the negotiations on the draft resolution and voted for its adoption. At the same time, we regret that the Council failed to adopt the draft resolution. It failed once again to shoulder its moral and legal responsibility as the main organ entrusted with the maintenance of international peace and security. We reaffirm, like other countries and members of the Security Council and UN and humanitarian organizations, the need for an immediate ceasefire, the need to prevent the occupation powers from implementing their schemes which target more than 1.5 million Palestinians in Rafah, the need to prevent yet another forced displacement of Palestinians and emptying of Palestinian land. It is unacceptable by any standard for the Security Council to continue to work at the whim of political calculations and narrow interests at a time where daily attacks continue on Palestinian people, deepening their suffering and killing thousands, including children, women, elderly, and sick people. The Security Council failed today to speak in one voice and put the principles of international law and international humanitarian law and the right to life first. This sends the wrong message once again to the occupying power and gives it a carte blanche to continue its crimes, disregarding international legitimacy and considering itself above the law and above all accountability. It worsens the lack of trust in the credibility of this important UN organ. In this vein, we reject, once again, the policies of favoritism of the occupation schemes and its protection at the expense of thousands of Palestinians who are being killed and their land that is being stolen based on the schemes of displacement and settlement. We reject the double standards that only protract the Palestinian question, that lead to the non-implementation of any relevant resolution. This has caused massacres and abuse of the rights of the Palestinian people. We call for dealing with all situations and questions with the same level of commitment and with the same standards. We call upon the international community and the Security Council to provide protection to Palestinian civilians and accelerate the unimpeded entry and delivery of humanitarian assistance to Gaza in implementation of Security Council Resolutions 2720 and 2712. We fully support the efforts of the UN Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator in Gaza, Sigrid Kaag, and her efforts to address the current catastrophic humanitarian situation in the Strip. Madam President, the current efforts to agree on an exchange of prisoners, detained persons, and on a truce do not go against the call for an immediate ceasefire, because the ceasefire can only facilitate such efforts. Nothing can justify the insistence to reject the draft resolution calling for a ceasefire and allowing the international community and the Security Council to speak in one voice, except the occupation government's attempt to continue its military operations and displace Palestinians. As we see the attempt to steer the Council away and prevent it from shouldering its responsibilities set out in the UN Charter in such catastrophic situations, we cannot help but wonder, what exactly is the role of the Security Council? When will it be allowed to play this supposed role? How many innocent lives should be killed before this actually happens? Are 28,000 people killed, 70,000 injured, and 1.3 million displaced not enough? Is the destruction of all the infrastructure, homes, hospitals, schools, worship places, and UN offices not enough? Is the killing of dozens of UN and humanitarian workers and journalists not enough? Madam President, the Arab group strongly condemns the repeated attacks by the occupation power on Syria and Lebanon and its violation of their sovereignty, the killing of innocent civilians and anything that threatens peace and stability in the region and the world. We will continue to make every effort at all levels and in all fora so that the international community shoulders its responsibilities without any selectivity or political considerations to compel the occupation power to respect the international law and international humanitarian law and end its criminal schemes and blatant violations of the rights of the Palestinian people. Thank you, Madam President.
Tunisia for his statement. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Egypt to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. I now give the floor to the representative of Egypt.
Thank you, Madam President. Distinguished members, today morning we have witnessed once again a stark example of double standards. The U.S. delegation, for the third time, has obstructed the adoption by the Security Council of a ceasefire resolution on Gaza, despite 13 votes in favor of the draft resolution submitted by Algeria with full support by the Arab and Islamic groups in the United Nations. We are grateful for Algeria, the Arab member of the Security Council, for putting forward the draft resolution. We are grateful for all those who voted in favor of the draft resolution. Yet the delegation of Egypt expresses its disappointment and frustration as a result of the obstruction by the U.S. of endeavors for ceasefire, by obstructing this main body entrusted with maintenance of international peace and security to assume its duties. Distinguished delegates, where would this U.S. vote stand in the face of the humanitarian suffering that reached the catastrophe level after the 20th week of the war in Gaza? How can we call for a rules-based international order while when we call for the implementation of these rules, we are met only with deaf ears? When the Secretary General of the UN invoked Article 99 of the Charter of the United Nations, wasn't it an indicative of the measure requested from the Security Council? Isn't the ICJ order indicating provisional measures indicative of the urgent need for a ceasefire? The reports from OCHA, WHO, and UNRWA on the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza, in particular along the borders with Egypt in Rafah, aren't they enough to convince the U.S. delegation to vote in favor of ceasefire? 140 days after the onslaught of the conflict and after more than 30,000 persons lost their life, women and children, as a result of the war in Gaza. Distinguished delegates, Egypt was the first Arab country to have peace with Israel. Egypt is more keen on the stability of the Middle East region, and Egypt will continue to bear the heaviest brunt politically, security, humanitarianly as a result of the crisis. And despite the failure of the Council, Egypt is committed to work tirelessly to put an end to the bloodshed, to put an end to the destructive war, to restore political horizon, to achieve the aspirations of the Palestinian and Israeli peoples in peace and stability in line with international legitimacy resolutions with the establishment of the independent Palestinian state along the lines of June 1967 with East Jerusalem as its capital. Mr. President, Egypt negotiates and mediates meaningfully and seriously in coordination with the US, Qatar, Israel, and Palestine to expeditiously release the Palestinian hostages and to deliver humanitarian aid at scale to put an end to the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza, to save the Palestinian brothers from the unjust siege imposed on them by the Israeli occupying power, and to stand in the face of all attempts by Israel to impose forced displacement on the Palestinian people to liquidate the Palestinian cause. Egypt calls on the Security Council and all responsible international powers to save the choice for peace by immediate implementation of ceasefire. This will not impede the ongoing mediation efforts, but rather will create the conducive conditions for its success. Let us negotiate and mediate in an environment of smooth flow of humanitarian aid and restored calm and healing the wounds of the wounded, instead of negotiating and mediating in an atmosphere of war and destruction caused by the destructive Israeli war machine. Madam President, Egypt's call for all of you is plain and simple. Cease fire now. Let's not mistake this noble and direct message as anything as having political calculations. It aims only at saving the civilians. Egypt warns once again against the catastrophic risks looming against the Palestinian people as a result of the declared plans of Israel to have ground offensive in Rafah. And we warn the international community of the consequences of this destructive war. Thank you, Madam President.
For his statement, the representative of China has asked for the floor to make a further statement, and I now give them the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Earlier, we heard the representative of Israel raising a question to the Chinese delegation. In response, we'd like to say, every life is precious. Every life has the right to be protected. Regarding your reference, the Israeli citizen Noah being detained, her mother was once a national of China. Recently, our diplomats here in New York, at the request of the Permanent Mission of Israel, met with the friends of Noah. Like the friends and family of Noah, we hope she can return home early. In fact, China has never stopped calling for the early release of all those detained. Therefore, we hope that Israel, with the mediation of Egypt and Qatar, there will be progress in negotiating a deal. As we have repeatedly emphasized, collective punishment for the Palestinian civilians is not the right response. It will only be counterproductive. The only way towards the peace between the two countries is the two-state solution to avoid a bigger disaster. The pressing priority is immediate ceasefire. We hope Israel will listen to the overwhelming voice of the international community, and after listening to the voices of the council members and other countries, you should make the correct judgment rather than changing the subject. Thank you.
For his statement, there are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
You know, every council member, almost every council member will say that in their statements. We think it should be reflected in a resolution, even a humanitarian resolution. And let me just say, every life matters, And so it is important that we find a solution that will stop the killing and deaths and suffering of the Palestinian people. And that's why we're on the ground 24/7. No one else is putting their people out there. No one else is putting skin and boots on the ground to find a solution to this situation. And we'll keep working on that every single day.
Hi, Ambassador. China described your position that the Algerian draft would undermine regional efforts at the hostage deal as completely untenable given the situation on the ground. Explain then, Ambassador, how the Algerian draft would have placed those talks in jeopardy, given that the Algerian text also called for the immediate release of those hostages.
Yes, but they also call for an immediate ceasefire, which would give Hamas the cover of not releasing the hostage. Part of the ceasefire that we're working on requires that they do exactly that, and this resolution did not make that connection. And it was our concern that it would send the wrong message to Hamas, that this resolution, which actually gives them something that they have asked for without requiring them to do something in return, would have meant that the fighting would have continued. Because without the hostage releases, we know that the fighting is going to continue. Thank you all.
أنا طويل فنكون وراك.
احنا طوال انت خلي يبدا رياض.
لا تفضل انت الرئيس، شرف.
خش خش خش.
كلام عربي ولا انجليزي؟
يعني نسوي انجليزي اول شيء.
يلا. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. We found, regrettably, we found ourselves once again with the Security Council incapable of shouldering its responsibilities and its duties in adopting a resolution that calls for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire given the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza. The Arab group will continue its efforts with the international community at all the levels to establish this humanitarian ceasefire. And I'll let my colleague, Dr. Riyadh, to say a few words.
Well, thank you very much for being with us. I just want to begin by expressing our gratitude to all of my brothers and sisters of the Arab group, demonstrating, as usual, our total unity in calling for an immediate ceasefire. And also, I want to express our gratitude to my brother from Algeria and his team, and to the Algerian people and their government, who represented us in an impeccable way in the Security Council. And they gave all the necessary time to all members of the Security Council over the course of the last 3 weeks to sincerely and genuinely try to reach an agreement after 140 days to have an immediate ceasefire to save lives and to save the looming catastrophe above our heads in Rafah, in which approximately 1.5 million Palestinians are cramped in that small area to try to save their lives and to stop the Israeli occupying forces from invading Rafah. Regrettably, we are extremely disappointed that a resolution was not adopted in spite of the fact that there was very strong support by 13.5, you can say close to 14 members of the Security Council to that call. And we thought that this massive support in the Council, outside the Council, in the General Assembly, in the Summit of NAM, in the Summit of the Arab countries and the Islamic countries, and in the Summit of the African Union just a few days ago, in which everyone is saying ceasefire, ceasefire now. Even high school students in the city of New York who decided last week to march in the streets out of their schools demanding a ceasefire now, and millions in all corners of the globe. Unfortunately, one country does not see it that way. And if that country has the power to say, as it was announced in the Council, that they want to have a long cessation of hostilities to be able to negotiate what they are negotiating with two of our countries, Egypt and Qatar, the release of prisoners and the hostages, who is stopping them from demonstrating to us through action of stopping the fighting, and then to continue to negotiate whether the Security Council adopt a resolution or not, although it is the charter responsibility of the Security Council, whenever there is conflict, whenever there is war, that the first thing that they should ask for is a ceasefire. Let me also say a few things in Arabic. أنا وصلت البارح مساء منتصف الليل قادما من محكمة العدل الدولية، حيث قدمنا مرافعة دولة فلسطين عبر أكثر من 3 ساعات تحدث فيها 5 من أفضل المحامين في العالم ووزير الخارجية، وأنا شخصيا كان لي شرف أن أتكلم في النهاية لبضعة دقائق لأنقل عذابات وأحاسيس وألم وجرح الشعب الفلسطيني أمام أعلى محكمة في العالم، طالبين الإنصاف والعدالة ووضع حد لمحنة الشعب الفلسطيني وإنجاز حقوقه كاملة. وبطبيعة الحال لأنه حدد في مجلس الأمن أن التصويت سيتم صباح هذا اليوم، فبدلا من أن أمكث وقتا أكثر لأسمع إلى مرافعات الآخرين، عدت إلى نيويورك في الموقع الطبيعي لي مع أشقائي وشقيقاتي المجموعة العربية في مجلس الأمن، الذين أبدعوا في طرح الموقف العربي الجماعي اليوم وبمنتهى الألم وبمنتهى الخطورة، كما عبر عن ذلك شقيقي أسامة من مصر المحاذية لقطاع غزة ولفلسطين جغرافيا وسياسة ووجدانا وقلبا، ونحييهم على ذلك. والكلمات القوية التي قالها أخي عمار باسم الجزائر التي تعبر عن عمق مشاعرنا نحن في فلسطين ونقدرها ونشكرهم على ذلك، وكذلك تعبر عن مشاعر وأحاسيس جميع العرب جميعا، وكذلك كلمتنا المشتركة التي ألقاها أخي طارق رئيس المجموعة من تونس، وأختي عالية التي طرحت باسم مجموعة منظمة مجلس التعاون الخليجي. كل ذلك يعني أبرز بشكل لا لبس فيه أنه ليس فقط عندنا إجماعا عربيا قويا حول هذه المسائل وقف إطلاق النار، ولكن شبه إجماع دولي حول هذه المسألة. وقبل أن تسألوني ما هي الخطوة القادمة، نحن ندرس كل الخطوات، ولن نترك مجالا لا لمجلس الأمن ولا للجمعية العامة ولا محكمة العدل الدولية ولا مجلس حقوق الإنسان الذي سيبدأ بعد بضعة أيام. سنبقى نطرق كل الأبواب ومع الملايين في الشوارع في كل مكان في العالم من أجل أن يتوقف هذا العدوان، وأن لا يتم مذبحة ونكبة رفح ونكبة أهلنا في غزة، ونتفادى ذلك عبر موقف واضح ورسمي من مجلس الأمن باعتماد ليس فقط قرار لوقف العدوان وإنما تنفيذ وقف العدوان فورا. نشكركم على تواجدكم، أنتم يعني لسان حالنا في أن تعبروا عن هذه المأساة وعن هذا الإخفاق في مجلس الأمن. انقلوه بأمانة ودقة إلى كل أنحاء العالم، لأن نريد من العالم أن يزيد من ضغطه للتوصل إلى وقف إطلاق النار. وشكرا. Okay. 1, 2, 3.
Okay. Can I ask you about, you heard the US ambassador raise it in the meeting. She has a new draft resolution. It does not have the words immediate ceasefire, but it does use the word ceasefire for the first time, and there is one part of that resolution that says the Rafah offensive should not proceed. What is your view of that resolution, and are there parts of it that you can work with?
I think that you should ask her, because it seems to me that you are slightly unclear about exactly what she means. She is more qualified than me to say that. We welcome using ceasefire. She said that to us in closed meeting, call it whatever you want, pauses, ceasefire. She said that to us in closed meeting. It was good that it was said, but more importantly, if they believe in that, who is stopping them from implementing that and influencing Israel to do so? Talal.
معالي السفير، ندرك أنكم ستتجهون إلى جميع المحافل الدبلوماسية بحثاً عن الحل، ليس فقط من خلال مجلس الأمن، ولكن هل الطريق أغلق الآن من خلال المجلس بسبب التعنت الأمريكي والوقوف بصورة غير محايدة تماماً ومنحازة إلى جانب إسرائيل وإصرارهم أنه لا وقف لإطلاق النار حتى التوصل إلى اتفاق حول إطلاق سراح جميع الرهائن؟ وبالنسبة لقطر ومصر إذا أمكن، هل هناك مؤشرات الآن بوجود قادة حماس في القاهرة إلى ربما انفتاح انفراج في الملف؟ أترك ذلك لكم.
باختصار، بالنسبة لنا نحن والجزائر وكل الذين يتحدثوا من العرب لن نقبل أن باب مجلس الأمن قد أغلق. سنبقى نطرق هذا الباب إلى أن يتحمل مجلس الأمن مسؤوليته وأن يتحملها بأسرع وقت ممكن لإيقاف وقف إطلاق النار.
أخ طلال، بالنسبة لسؤالك
مصر
موقف المجموعة العربية إزاء انسداد الأفق أو الطريق في مجلس الأمن، نحن كما أشرت في بداية هذا اللقاء المجموعة العربية لن تتوقف طبعا، وسيكون مجلس الأمن هو الخطوة القادمة في مناسبات متتالية، لأننا نصر على تحميل مجلس الأمن لمسؤوليته التي يقرها الميثاق الأمم المتحدة والقانون الدولي. ولكن نحن ندرك أنه كل ما فات الوقت هناك أرواح تزهق، وهناك كارثة تنذر بتعميق معاناة أكثر من 1.5 مليون في رفح. سنتحرك على جميع المستويات وفي جميع المحافل، ولكن سيكون مجلس الأمن دائما نصب أعيننا، لأنها مسؤوليته التاريخية والقانونية والأخلاقية أيضا. تفضل.
شكرا أخي طلال. طبعا سؤالك حول المفاوضات الجارية في العواصم، كما تعلمون يعني الجهود اللي تبذلها دولة قطر بالتعاون مع الأشقاء في مصر وبالتعاون مع الولايات المتحدة لم تتوقف، فهي مستمرة للوصول إلى اتفاق لهدنة إنسانية جديدة تسمح بالدرجة الأولى طبعا هي لحق دماء أشقائنا الفلسطينيين، إطلاق سراح الأسرى المحتجزين في القطاع، وكذلك المحتجزين الفلسطينيين، لأن كما تذكرون الاتفاق الأول احتوى على ذلك وحققنا نجاح كبير فيه. لذا الجهود لا زالت مستمرة، وبالفعل هذه الأيام أيام دقيقة ومهمة للتوصل لاتفاق. سوف نبذل كل ما بوسعنا، يعني الجهود مستمرة. كنا نتمنى اليوم المجلس يتخذ قرار يدفع باتجاه ضغط أكبر على الطرف الإسرائيلي أيضا، مما يساعد المفاوضات الجارية. فإحنا ننظر للتحرك في المجلس كدافع للتحرك كذلك في العواصم للتوصل لاتفاق لهدنة إنسانية جديدة. شكرا لك.
أسامة.
نفس الكلمات، ليس لدي الكثير لأضيفه على ما تفضلت به أختي العزيزة السفيرة علياء. مصر وقطر ملتزمتان وجدتان للغاية في التعامل مع تلك المفاوضات الشائكة. تلك المفاوضات بطبيعتها معقدة ولا يمكن التنبؤ بسرعة تحقيق النتائج، إنما ما نؤكده أن الجهد والعزم أكيد من كل الأطراف في محاولة لتحقيق الاختراق المطلوب، إيقاف نزيف الدماء. وكما تفضلت أختي العزيزة السفيرة علياء، لا انفصال بين قيام مجلس الأمن تحمل واجباته ووقف إطلاق النار، بل على العكس نفضل كما أوضحت في بياننا أن نتفاوض وسط الهدوء، وسط انسياب المساعدات، وسط علاج الجرحى، بدلا من أن نتفاوض تحت الضغط الشديد الذي قد ينذر بالمزيد من تصعيب المفاوضات الصعبة بطبيعتها، وبإذن الله مستمرون.
Edith.
Thank you very much. Does the Arab group have any plans to take this resolution to the General Assembly for a vote there?
Oh, this is what I meant, that you will be asking that question, and I'm glad that you're asking that question. We have all the options available to us. The resumed emergency session is one serious option. We will decide when to do it, and even if the same language or different language. And also, we are contemplating also the possibility of seeing the representative that casted the veto to address and to defend itself before the General Assembly, which is an automatic thing that could take place within 10 days. All these options are available to us. We will continue meeting as an Arab group and other friends, and we will discuss all these options, and we will decide on the step that we will begin with, but we will not relent until we succeed in having a ceasefire.
So does that mean that we can expect some sooner rather than later action by the Arab group in the General Assembly?
That it's a good assumption, and I think that most likely we will be acting on the basis of your assessment. Let me also add that we in the Arab group, strong defenders of the Secretary General and his principal position in calling for human rights, human ceasefire early in the ball game, And also we salute him for his courage in invoking Article 99 when he came to the Security Council. And also we are defenders of all UN agencies working in the humanitarian field, that they are carrying honorably their mandate, and all of the lies that you heard from one speaker in the chamber are lies and reflecting noise in his head, are not reflecting reality, which is being admired by the entire international community. And such audacity of challenging the Security Council, that he is going to implement 1701, and he is the lover of Security Council Resolution 1701, when he is refusing and attacking every Security Council resolution related to what Israel should do, is beyond the theater of absurd, and you should expose such arrogance and, listening to the noise in his head and not listening to the international community and all members of the Security Council when they say what they said. I think that that is worth noting, and it is up to you whether you want to reflect it in your reporting. Although I'm not advising you to waste too much time in that point, but I trust your judgment. Thank you so much. forgot my phone and my glasses.